Hello dear listeners, welcome back to another Life History channel, the quiet place where history helps you slow down and drift into sleep. Tonight, we'll step gently into the frozen world of the Vikings. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below telling us what time it is where you are right now, and which country you're calling home tonight. We love hearing from our global community of history lovers and sleep seekers. Now, dim your lights, get comfortable under your blankets, and let's travel together back to a time when winter meant something entirely different than it does today. You're standing outside a Viking Longhouse on a December evening in 9th century Norway. The sun has been gone for weeks, swallowed by the endless polar night that transforms Scandinavia into a realm of perpetual darkness. Your breath clouds the air in thick white plumes, freezing almost instantly into tiny crystals that catch whatever faint moonlight manages to penetrate the heavy cloud cover above. The temperature has dropped to somewhere around -20 degrees Celsius, maybe colder. It is hard to tell when your face has gone numb and your fingers feel like they might snap off if you move them too quickly. The wind howls across the fjord behind you, carrying with it the promise of even colder nights to come. Nights that will test every survival skill your ancestors have passed down through countless generations of hardy northerners who refuse to abandon these frozen lands. The longhouse before you is a low, dark structure that seems to hunker down against the earth, like a sleeping animal trying to conserve warmth. Its walls are made of thick timber logs, chinked with moss, mud, and whatever else could be shoved into the gaps to keep out the screaming wind. The roof is covered with layers of turf, actual living grass and soil piled so thick that in summer, wildflowers bloom up there. But now it is just frozen solid, a heavy blanket of earth that helps insulate the structure below. Smoke rises from a hole in the centre of the roof, a thin grey column that gets whipped away almost immediately by the relentless wind, and you can smell it. That distinctive scent of burning wood mixed with something else, something organic and pungent that makes your nose wrinkle even as you hurry toward the door. You push open the heavy wooden door, which is really more of a leather flap stretched across a frame, and immediately a wall of warmth hits you, but so does the smell. Oh, the smell! Imagine taking every farm animal you have ever encountered, cramming them into your bedroom, adding a dozen unwashed humans who have not bathed since October, throwing in some drying fish, smoking meat, stale beer, wet wool, human waste in a bucket in the corner, and then sealing all of it in an airtight container for 3 months. That is what you are walking into. And yet, after the brutal cold outside, it almost smells good because it smells like survival, like warmth, like life continuing despite the winter's best efforts to extinguish it. The interior of the longhouse is a single large room, maybe 60 feet long and 20 feet wide, with a central hearth running down the middle like a spine of fire and smoke. The ceiling is low, maybe 8 feet at its highest point, blackened with generations of soot that has created a thick, tar-like coating on every surface above head height. The fire pit itself is just a long trench dug into the dirt floor, lined with stones to contain the flames, and it is always burning, always, because letting it go out would mean death for everyone inside. Keeping that fire alive through the winter is a sacred duty, and someone is always awake, always feeding it, always making sure the flames never die. But you're not alone in this house, not by a long shot. Pressed against the walls on raised platforms are the sleeping areas, basically wooden benches covered with straw, animal furs, and whatever fabric could be spared. On one side of the house, the human family sleeps, or tries to sleep. On the other side, separated by nothing more than a low wooden partition, are the animals. Yes, the animals live here too, because in a climate this hostile, losing your livestock means losing your food supply, your clothing supply, and your fertilizer supply all at once. So the cows, goats, sheep, and occasionally even the horses are brought inside for the winter, their body heat contributing to the overall warmth of the structure, their presence contributing to the overall smell. Let me paint you a more detailed picture of your sleeping arrangements tonight, because they are unlike anything your modern mind has probably imagined. The sleeping platform is basically a long wooden shelf built into the wall about 3 feet off the ground. It is covered with a thick layer of straw, which sounds cosy until you remember that straw is basically just dried grass. And dried grass gets compressed and lumpy and starts to rot if it gets damp, which it always does because humans sweat. Children wet the bed, and moisture condenses on every surface in the house. On top of the straw are animal skins, furs from every creature your family has managed to kill or trade for. Bear, reindeer, seal, wolf, fox, whatever keeps you from freezing to death. These furs are greasy. They smell like the animals they came from mixed with the humans who have been sleeping under them. And they are absolutely precious because they are the difference between life and death. Now here is where it gets really interesting. There is no such thing as privacy. The entire family sleeps on this platform together. Grandmother, grandfather, father, mother, children, sometimes aunts and uncles and cousins if they are visiting or if their own house burned down. Everyone is piled together like puppies, sharing body heat, sharing breath, sharing every single bodily function and midnight noise. You learn very quickly not to be embarrassed about anything, because embarrassment is a luxury you cannot afford when survival depends on communal warmth. The children sleep in the middle where it is warmest, the adults on the outside edges, and if you need to get up in the middle of the night to relieve yourself in the bucket, you have to climb over at least 4 other people, all of whom will grunt and complain but ultimately understand because they will need to do the same thing before morning. The temperature inside the Longhouse hovers somewhere around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, which sounds cold until you remember it is -20 outside. This is tropical by comparison, practically a sauna, and you will be grateful for every degree of warmth even as you lie there sweating under those furs, because too many blankets is always better than too few. Your body heat, combined with that of your 9 family members and the 6 large animals on the other side of the partition, plus the constantly burning fire, creates a microclimate that just barely keeps everyone alive through the long dark months. But let's talk about those animals for a moment, because they are your roommates whether you like it or not. The cows are massive, warm, breathing mountains of beef and milk that stand in their stalls, chewing their cud with that slow, rhythmic grinding that becomes a kind of background music to your winter life. They smell like cows, which is to say they smell like digested grass and manure and warm hide. They produce vast quantities of both heat and methane, and while the heat is welcome, the methane contributes to the overall fug in the air that makes your eyes water and your throat feel coated. You name them, you talk to them, you even grow fond of them in a weird way because they are keeping you warm and providing milk through the winter, and you know that come spring, you might have to slaughter one if the food stores run too low. The goats are smaller but no less pungent, with their sharp, musky scent that seems to cling to everything. They're climbers by nature, and even indoors they try to climb on things, which means someone is constantly having to shoo them off the sleeping platforms or away from the food stores. They're also loud, bleating at odd hours, head-butting each other in dominance displays, generally making nuisances of themselves. But they give milk, and eventually meat, and hide. so they stay. The sheep are quieter, more docile, huddled together in a fluffy mass of lanolin-coated wool that smells like wet dog mixed with old cheese. That wool will be sheared in spring, cleaned, carded, spun, and woven into the cloth that makes your clothes. So you tolerate their presence even when they're making your home smell like a barn, which of course it is. Living in such close quarters with animals means you become intimately familiar with their rhythms, their sounds, their moods. You know when a cow's about to lie down because she shifts her weight in a particular way. You know when a goat is annoyed because the pitch of her bleat changes. You know when the sheep are cold because they press closer together, their collective body heat creating a steaming mass of wool and breath. These animals are not pets, they are survival partners, and you treat them with a mixture of pragmatism and respect, because your life literally depends on them making it through the winter alive. The fire, that eternal flame running down the centre of the house, requires constant attention. Wood must be fed into it steadily but not wastefully, because firewood is a precious resource that has to last from October to April, maybe longer if winter decides to overstay its welcome. The smoke from the fire rises toward the roof hole, but not all of it makes it out. Much of it hangs in the air at head height and above, creating a permanent haze that stings your eyes and makes your throat scratchy. You get used to it, the way you get used to everything else. But visitors always cough and wipe their eyes when they first enter. The smoke does serve a purpose beyond just being annoying. It helps preserve the meat and fish hanging from the rafters, slowly smoking them throughout the winter, turning them dark and hard and incredibly salty, but also edible for months on end. Speaking of food, let us discuss what you are eating during these endless dark months. Fresh food is basically a memory at this point. The last of the fresh vegetables were eaten in November. Now you're living on preserved foods, salted and dried and fermented things that would make a modern person weep with despair. Dried fish is a staple, cod or herring that has been split open, salted and hung to dry until it becomes hard as wood and has to be soaked in water for hours before it is remotely edible. When you cook it, it fills the house with a smell that is somehow both appetizing and revolting at the same time, fishy and salty and smoky all at once. You eat it with flatbread made from whatever grain you manage to harvest and grind before winter. Barley, usually, which makes a dense, heavy bread that sits in your stomach like a stone but at least provides calories. There is also preserved meat if you were lucky during the full slaughter. Pork and mutton, salted or smoked or both, hanging from the rafters alongside the fish, slowly giving up their moisture to the constant smoke of the fire. You hack off pieces as needed, reconstitute them in soups and stews that simmer over the fire for hours, coaxing whatever flavour and nutrition you can from ingredients that are doing their best to survive preservation. Root vegetables, if you have them, turnips and onions and carrots stored in pits dug into the floor and covered with straw, slowly withering and softening as winter progresses but still providing some variety to your diet. Porridge features heavily, grain boiled with water or milk if you can spare it, sometimes flavoured with dried herbs or a precious bit of honey if you're celebrating something. And then there is the mead, the blessed mead. Honey wine that was fermented during the warmer months and stored in casks and horns and whatever containers could keep it from freezing. Though at these temperatures even alcohol-laden beverages can turn slushy. Mead is more than just a drink. It is medicine, entertainment, social lubricant, and sometimes breakfast all rolled into one. When the darkness presses in and the walls feel like they are closing and you cannot remember what the sun looks like, a horn of mead can make the world seem a little less bleak. People drink it throughout the day in small amounts. and in larger amounts during evening gatherings when stories are told and songs are sung, and for a few hours everyone can pretend that winter will not last forever. The social dynamics of living in such close quarters are fascinating and complex. Imagine spending 6 months in a windowless room with your entire extended family, never more than 20 feet away from another human being, never having a moment truly to yourself. Modern people complain about being stuck at home with family for a few days during the holidays. Imagine months of it, with no escape, no separate rooms to retreat to, no headphones to put on and tune everyone out. You learn patience you never knew you had, or you go slightly mad, or both. Arguments break out over the smallest things. Who is taking more than their share of the furs? Whose turn it is to feed the fire? Whether the children are being too loud? Whether someone's feet smell worse than usual? Which is saying something considering the baseline level of foot smell in a Viking longhouse. But you also develop a kind of enforced intimacy, a deep knowledge of each other's habits and quirks and rhythms. You know who snores and how loudly. You know who has nightmares and needs comforting in the dark. You know who gets up 3 times a night to pee and should maybe cut back on the evening mead. You know which child is afraid of the dark and needs to sleep closest to the fire, and which grandparent has aching joints that need extra furs piled on them. This knowledge breeds both irritation and compassion, often simultaneously. You might want to strangle your brother for the way he chews his dried fish so loudly, but you also know that he saved your life last winter when you fell through the ice on the fjord, so you let it go, mostly. Children in this environment grow up without any modern concept of childhood privacy or innocence. They see and hear everything: birth, death, sex, violence, illness, joy, all of it happening within the same 4 walls. This makes them tough in ways modern children are not, but it also means they carry different psychological burdens. They learn early that life is hard, that winter is cruel, that survival requires everyone to contribute. Even young children have jobs, tending the fire, checking on the animals, helping prepare food, keeping the babies entertained and quiet. There is no concept of childhood as a protected time of carefree play. You're born, you survive, you help the family survive, and if you're very lucky, you live long enough to have children of your own who will repeat the cycle. Entertainment during these long dark months is crucial for maintaining sanity. When the sun is gone and the snow is too deep and the wind is too cold for anyone to go outside except for absolute necessities, people need something to occupy their minds. This is where the skalds come in, the storytellers who carry in their memories the great sagas and poems of your people. These are not written down. Writing is rare and precious, and most people cannot read anyway. Instead, the stories live in the minds of those who have memorized them, sometimes hundreds or thousands of lines of verse, epic tales of gods and heroes, voyages and battles, love and betrayal. On long winter nights, a skilled skald can transport everyone in that smoky, smelly longhouse to another world, make them forget for a while that they're cold and hungry and tired of the same faces. The stories serve multiple purposes. They entertain, obviously, but they also educate, passing down cultural values, historical events, and practical knowledge disguised as narrative. They reinforce social bonds, giving everyone a shared cultural touchstone, something to reference and discuss and debate. And they give meaning to suffering by placing individual struggles within the context of larger mythological and heroic frameworks. When you're lying there on your straw bed, with your cousin's elbow in your ribs and someone's feet in your face, listening to the tale of Thor's battle against the frost giants, you can feel a connection to something bigger than your own discomfort. You're part of a tradition, a people, a story that stretches back generations and will continue forward after you're gone. Music also plays a role, though instruments are few and simple. bone flutes, drums made from stretched hide, lyres with strings of twisted gut or horsehair. These create the soundscape for long winter evenings. The songs are often haunting, minor-keyed melodies that seem to capture the melancholy of endless winter darkness. Some songs tell stories, miniature sagas compressed into verse and melody. Others are work songs, rhythmic chants that help pass the time during repetitive tasks like grinding grain or combing wool. Still others are sacred, invoking gods and spirits, asking for protection, for spring to come, for the family to survive one more winter. Even if you have no musical talent yourself, you join in on the choruses, your voice blending with your family's voices, creating a sound that fills the Longhouse and pushes back against the silence of the snow outside. Games are another crucial form of entertainment. Board games carved from wood or bone, with pieces made from pebbles or carved figures, provide hours of strategic thinking and friendly competition. Nefertafel, a war game where one side defends a king piece and the other tries to capture it, is wildly popular and can lead to surprisingly heated matches. Dice games, knucklebones used as random number generators, lead to gambling on trivial stakes because nobody has much to gamble with. You might bet a horn of mead, or the choice of sleeping position, or the privilege of not having to empty the waste bucket for a week. Wrestling matches break out regularly, because when you are cooped up with limited space, young men especially need a physical outlet for their energy, so the furs get pushed aside and two people grapple in the limited space, everyone else shouting encouragement or mockery depending on who they are rooting for. Crafts and handiwork keep hands busy when minds threaten to stagnate. Women and some men weave, using upright looms that stand against the walls, creating the cloth that will become next year's clothing. It is meditative work, the shuttle passing back and forth, the rhythmic beating of the weft into place, the slow transformation of thread into fabric. Others carve, turning pieces of wood or antler into useful or decorative objects, spoons, combs, gaming pieces, amulets. Some people work leather, cutting and stitching new shoes or straps or bags, their hands moving with the practiced efficiency of those who have done this work 1,000 times. These activities are not just time fillers, they're essential for maintaining and replacing the tools and goods that make life possible, but they also provide psychological relief, a sense of accomplishment, of creating something during a season when everything feels like slow decay. Physical intimacy in such close quarters is both inevitable and complicated. Married couples share the sleeping platform with everyone else, and there is no such thing as a private bedroom for romantic activities. This means that sex happens either very quietly under the furs while everyone else pretends to be asleep, or it happens in the barn area after everyone has genuinely fallen asleep, which adds a level of complexity, because now you're getting intimate surrounded by livestock who could not care less about your romantic life. Children are conceived during these winter months, born the following fall, and nobody thinks this is weird or inappropriate because this is just how life works when you have no privacy. Modesty is a luxury, and luxury has no place in a Viking longhouse in January. The bathroom situation, since we are discussing uncomfortable realities, is exactly as bad as you're imagining. There is a bucket, or sometimes multiple buckets depending on the size of the household. These buckets sit in a corner, sometimes partially screened by a hanging piece of cloth if you are lucky, and they serve as the communal toilet. You do your business into the bucket, trying not to think too hard about the lack of toilet paper, which has not been invented yet, so you are using moss or straw or cloth scraps that get washed and reused. The buckets get emptied once or twice a day, depending on how full they get and how brave someone is feeling about venturing out into the freezing cold to dump them. In the meantime, they sit there, contributing their own special notes to the overall symphony of smells that define your living space. You get used to it. Humans can get used to almost anything. But visitors definitely notice. Bathing is essentially not a thing during winter. The effort and resources required to heat enough water for a proper bath are prohibitive when every piece of firewood is precious, so people simply do not bathe at all, for months. They might wipe down with a damp cloth if they feel particularly grimy, but full body washing is out of the question. This means everyone is carrying around months of accumulated sweat, dead skin, and general biological film. Your hair becomes greasy and matted. Your skin develops a sort of protective layer of grime that probably helps with insulation if you think about it optimistically. Lice are common, almost universal, and people spend time grooming each other like primates, picking through hair and clothes, crushing the parasites they find. It is social bonding and pest control combined. The lack of sunlight does things to your mind. Seasonal affective disorder is not some modern invention. Vikings suffered from it too. They just did not have a clinical name for it. When the sun disappears for weeks or months, depending on how far north you are, your body's circadian rhythms go haywire. Your mood plummets. You feel sluggish, irritable, weirdly hungry but not interested in the food available. Sleep becomes weird. You cannot tell when you should be awake or asleep because there are no daylight cues, so people drift in and out of sleep at odd hours, creating a 24/7 society where someone is always awake feeding the fire or checking the animals, or just lying there staring into the darkness wondering when spring will come. Depression during these months must have been common, even if they did not call it that. Imagine the psychological weight of endless darkness, cold, confinement, repetitive food, lack of privacy, constant illness, and the very real possibility that you might not survive until spring. Some people handled it better than others, drawing on internal reserves of stubbornness or faith or dark humour. Others sank into melancholy, became withdrawn, started participating in the life of the household. There was probably some understanding of this, traditions of trying to cheer up those who were struggling, but there was also probably a limit to communal patience when everyone is struggling, and survival requires everyone to keep functioning. Mental health care was not exactly a priority when physical survival was constantly in question. Illness spreads like wildfire in such close conditions. One person catches a cold, within days everyone has it, coughing and sneezing and making the air even more unpleasant. Stomach bugs are catastrophic when you are all sharing food and water and living space in that single bucket in the corner. Infections from minor cuts or scrapes can become serious when there is no concept of germ theory or antibiotics. You treat wounds with whatever folk remedies have been passed down. Honey, which actually does have antibacterial properties, though they did not know why. Certain herbs, prayers to Air the healing goddess, and hope. Children and elderly people are especially vulnerable, and it's not uncommon for families to enter winter with a certain number of members and emerge in spring with fewer. This is accepted as tragic but inevitable. Another cost of living in a climate that actively tries to kill you half the year. The animals also get sick, and when they do it's a crisis because losing a cow or goat means losing food and resources you cannot replace. You nurse them as best you can, moving them closer to the fire if they seem cold, offering them better food if you have any, sometimes even bringing them onto the human sleeping platform if they are in really bad shape. Because that cow's life is worth more than your comfort or your nose's happiness. If an animal dies, you butcher it immediately and preserve the meat, trying to salvage something from the loss. But the death still represents a major setback to your family's chances of making it through future winters. Every creature in that longhouse is a resource, a tool for survival, and losing any of them hurts. Let us talk about the children in more detail, because their experience of winter is particularly intense. Young children, toddlers and babies need constant supervision in an environment full of hazards. There is the fire pit, an open trench of flames running down the centre of the house with no guardrail, no protective barrier. Children learn very quickly not to get too close. Usually after one minor burn teaches them the lesson, but babies and very young toddlers have to be watched constantly or kept tied to their mothers with cloth wraps. There are the animals, large creatures with hooves and horns that could accidentally injure a child who wanders into the wrong space at the wrong time. There are sharp tools, knives and axes and shears left within reach because there is nowhere else to put them. There is the waste bucket, a drowning hazard for a curious toddler if you can believe such a horrible scenario. So children learn caution early, but they also learn resilience. A child who falls and scrapes a knee does not get much sympathy because everyone is dealing with discomfort and minor injuries are just part of life. You bind it up if it is bleeding, otherwise you tell the child to stop crying and go do their chores. This sounds harsh, and it is, but it produces people who do not fall apart at the first sign of hardship. By the time a Viking child is 7 or 8 years old, they can handle responsibilities that would terrify a modern parent to assign to a child that age. Starting fires, managing animals, using knives to prepare food, venturing out into dangerous weather to complete necessary tasks. This is not neglect or child abuse by their standards. This is education, preparing the next generation to survive in a world that shows no mercy to the unprepared. Older children and teenagers face different challenges during these winter months. They are cooped up with raging hormones, growing bodies, and very limited outlets for their energy and emotions. Young men might be sent out on hunts when weather permits, tracking deer or boar through snowy forests. But these expeditions are rare and dangerous when visibility is low and frostbite is a constant threat. Young women are learning the skills they will need as adults, weaving and cooking and preserving food and managing households. But they are also dealing with menstruation in an environment with no concept of sanitary products beyond cloth rags that get washed and reused. Romance blossoms despite or perhaps because of the close quarters. And parents have to navigate the tricky business of managing teenage attractions when everyone is literally on top of each other all the time. The concept of adolescence as a distinct life stage does not really exist in this culture. You are a child with certain limitations and protections, and then fairly quickly you are an adult with full responsibilities and expectations. The transition happens around 12 or 13 for girls, slightly older for boys, marked by biological changes and by the assignment of adult-level tasks. A 14-year-old girl might be married and pregnant, managing her own section of a household, or even her own small household, if her husband has managed to establish himself. A 15-year-old boy might be going on his first raiding voyage come spring, expected to fight and kill and bring back wealth or die trying. There is no extended period of being allowed to figure yourself out. You figure yourself out while doing the work of survival, because there is no alternative. The elderly in this society occupy an interesting position during winter months. If they have survived to old age, and many do not, they have proven themselves hardy and knowledgeable. They are respected for their experience, their memories of previous hard winters and what strategies worked for survival. They are the keepers of stories and songs and practical knowledge, the ones who remember how grandmother treated that particular type of fever, or where the best fishing spots are once the ice breaks up. But they are also, brutally, a drain on resources during the hardest months. They eat food, they take up space, they require care if they are infirm, and they contribute less physical labour than younger family members. Most families care for their elderly with genuine affection and duty, but there are probably also quiet calculations happening, conscious or unconscious, about how many mouths can be fed from dwindling stores. There are stories, possibly apocryphal but persistent, about old people in some Norse communities voluntarily removing themselves from the family burden when times got truly desperate. Walking out into the snow and not coming back, or climbing a cliff and jumping, acts of self-sacrifice to ensure younger family members had enough food to survive. Whether this actually happened with any regularity is debated by historians, but the fact that the stories exist tells us something about the harsh calculations that extreme scarcity forces upon communities. When staying alive requires calories, and calories are finite, every person becomes a math problem, and the elderly are aware of their own position in that equation. Let us return to the sensory experience of living in this longhouse, because it is so utterly alien to modern existence. The darkness is not just an absence of light, it is a presence, a heavy weight that presses down on everything. When you live in a place with electric lights, you forget that darkness is the natural state of night, and that for most of human history, people lived with levels of darkness that would terrify modern people. Inside the longhouse at night, the only light comes from the fire, and that fire creates more shadows than illumination. Faces are lit from below, making everyone look like strangers, like something from a nightmare. The corners of the house disappear into blackness. Shapes move in the darkness. Might just be a goat shifting position. Might be something else. Your imagination runs wild. The sounds at night form a constant background symphony. The crackle and pop of the fire. The snoring of multiple people in different keys and rhythms, creating an accidental chorus. The shuffling and breathing of animals. The wind outside, sometimes a low moan, sometimes a shriek that sounds almost human. The settling noises of the house itself. Wood contracting in the cold, making creaks and groans that you tell yourself are perfectly natural, even as they make your heart race. Someone gets up to pee, stumbling over people, muttering apologies. A baby wakes and cries, is hushed and whoa. A dog, if the family has one, whimpers in its sleep, chasing dream rabbits. This is the soundscape of your nights, never quite silent, never quite still. The tactile experience is equally specific. Everything feels damp because of the condensation from so much breathing and body heat in a poorly ventilated space. The furs you sleep under are greasy and heavy. The straw beneath you is compressed and lumpy, poking through the furs at pressure points. Your clothes, which you are still wearing because undressing for bed is not really practical when it is barely above freezing in the house, feel grimy and stiff with accumulated sweat and dirt. Your hair itches from the lice living in it. Your skin itches from general grime, and probably some kind of rash from the contact with dirty bedding and clothes. You scratch, everyone scratches. It is a constant background activity like breathing. The taste in your mouth is universally unpleasant. There is no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no concept of dental hygiene beyond maybe picking food out of your teeth with a wood splinter. You go to sleep with the taste of whatever you ate for dinner, probably that fish stew still coating your tongue. You wake up with the taste of morning breath compounded by months of accumulated oral bacteria. You might rinse your mouth with water or weak ale, but mostly you just accept that your mouth is not going to feel fresh and clean until spring when you can maybe chew on some green plants. Dental problems are common and painful, and there is no dentist to visit. You either live with the pain or someone pulls the offending tooth with pliers, probably while several people hold you down and you scream into a piece of leather. Touch is complicated in this environment. On one hand, humans need physical contact and warmth, and you're getting plenty of both through the forced proximity of family sleeping arrangements. The children especially benefit from this constant physical closeness, being held and touched and surrounded by protective bodies. But it is also utterly exhausting to never, ever be alone in your own skin, to always be aware of other people's bodies pressing against yours, to always be navigating whose limb is where, and who is snoring in your ear, and whose breath is on your neck. Modern people pay therapists to talk about issues with personal boundaries. Vikings simply did not have personal boundaries in the way we understand them, because having them would have been incompatible with survival. The psychological state of living through this winter is a strange mix of boredom, low-level anxiety, occasional peaks of terror when storms hit or food stores look too depleted, and a kind of resigned endurance. You are not happy, exactly, but you're not surprised by your unhappiness either. This is just what winter is, what it has always been, what it will always be. You mark time not by days which are indistinguishable from each other, but by smaller events. The day a particularly bad storm hit. The day the baby cut her first tooth. The day the old cow stopped giving milk. The day someone told that one story that made everyone laugh until they cried. These moments become landmarks in an otherwise featureless landscape of sameness. There are superstitions and rituals to help people feel some sense of control over their circumstances. Amulets carved with runes are worn for protection, for luck, for health. Offerings are made to the gods. Small sacrifices of food or drink poured out or burned even when you can barely spare the resources, because angering the gods is worse than being hungry. Certain days are considered lucky or unlucky for specific activities. You do not start any new project on an unlucky day. You do not name the wind when it is howling, especially fiercely because naming it gives it power. You throw salt on the threshold to keep out evil spirits. These practices probably do nothing in practical terms, but they do something psychologically. They create a sense of agency, of participation in your own fate rather than being purely at the mercy of elements beyond your control. The relationship with the natural world outside the Longhouse is both reverent and antagonistic. The winter landscape is beautiful in a harsh, alien way. Snowdrifts sculpted by wind into fantastic shapes. Ice formations hanging from eaves like crystal teeth. The rare clear night when stars fill the sky with a brilliance impossible to see in our light-polluted modern world. But that beauty is hostile. It is trying to kill you, and you can appreciate it only in brief moments when you're not actively fighting against it. Every trip outside to get firewood or check on outbuildings, or fetch water from the stream if it is not frozen solid, is a battle against cold that saps your strength and eats at your extremities. Frostbite is a constant danger and a common sight. Fingers and toes and noses and ears are especially vulnerable. And once you have experienced frostbite in a particular spot, that area becomes more susceptible to future damage. You see people missing fingers, missing the tips of ears, with noses that are scarred and misshapen from frozen tissue. You learn to recognise the warning signs, the numbness, the waxy appearance of skin, and you know to get inside immediately and warm the affected area slowly, not quickly, which causes more damage. You learn that frostbitten flesh sometimes turns black and dies and has to be removed, and if it gets infected, you might lose the whole limb or your life. These are lessons written in scars on the bodies of everyone who has survived multiple winters. Hypothermia is the silent killer, more dangerous than frostbite because it shuts down your core rather than just your extremities. You learn to recognise it in yourself and others, the uncontrollable shivering that gradually stops as the body gives up, the confusion and slurred speech, the paradoxical feeling of being too hot that makes people start removing clothing even as they freeze to death. If someone shows these signs, everyone springs into action, getting them inside, warming them gradually, giving them warm liquids, keeping them awake. Sometimes it works, sometimes the person falls asleep and does not wake up, and you have another body to store in the snow until spring when the ground thaws enough to dig a grave. Death in winter is complicated. You cannot bury people. The ground is frozen solid and will remain so for months. So bodies are stored, placed in outbuildings or even outside, where the cold preserves them until spring burial. This means living with the physical presence of your dead for months, knowing that your father or child or spouse is lying frozen in the shed, waiting. It is grim, and it must do things to your psychological state that are hard to imagine. But it is practical, the only option available, and Vikings are nothing if not practical in the face of impossible circumstances. Despite all of this hardship, or perhaps because of it, there are moments of genuine warmth and joy in the Longhouse. A child's laughter when someone makes a silly face, the satisfaction of a well-told story that makes everyone forget their discomfort for an hour, the sharing of a horn of mead among friends while snow piles up outside, the relief of waking up to find that everyone made it through another night, the quiet pride of a woman who has successfully woven a particularly fine piece of cloth, the camaraderie of men who have survived together and know they can depend on each other. These moments do not erase the hardship, but they make it bearable. They give meaning to the endurance. There is a concept in Norse culture that does not translate perfectly, but is something like stoic endurance combined with fatalism, combined with pride in one's ability to withstand hardship. You do not complain excessively about your suffering because everyone is suffering. You do not give up because giving up means death for yourself and potentially your family. You endure because endurance is what separates the living from the dead, and you take pride in your ability to endure because that's all you have. This mindset is both incredibly adaptive for the circumstances and probably psychologically damaging in ways that would take therapy to unpack. But therapy is not an option, so you just keep going. The gender dynamics during winter are worth examining because they reveal interesting aspects of Viking society. In many ways, the Longhouse in winter is the woman's domain. Men might do the hunting and raiding and fighting during warmer months, but in winter when everyone is confined to the house, it is the women who manage most of the day-to-day operations. They oversee food preparation and preservation. They manage the weaving and sewing. They tend to the sick. They keep the children alive and occupied. They maintain the fire. They monitor the food stores and make the difficult decisions about rationing. This gives women a kind of power and authority that might not be visible in the formal political structure, but is absolutely crucial to survival. Men, meanwhile, can feel somewhat useless during the deep winter months. Their primary skills, fighting, sailing, building, hunting, are mostly inapplicable when the world is frozen and dark. They maintain equipment, sharpen weapons, repair tools, tell stories of past exploits, plan for spring campaigns, but there is a lot of idle time that must be frustrating for people used to physical activity and accomplishment. This probably leads to tension, men feeling restless and confined, taking out their frustration in wrestling matches or arguments, drinking more than they should, generally being difficult to live with. The women probably have to manage these male egos along with everything else. One more task in an already overwhelming list. Children occupy their own social space, old enough to have responsibilities but not yet full adults, learning through observation and participation. A 10-year-old girl is shadowing her mother and grandmother, learning the countless skills she will need to run her own household, how to judge the quality of wool, how to spin thread of consistent thickness, how to proportion ingredients in cooking, how to tell when a child's fever is serious, how to manage conflicts between family members, how to make resources stretch further than seems possible. A 10-year-old boy is learning from his father and uncles how to care for weapons, how to read weather signs, how to judge the character of animals and men, how to tell stories that hold attention, how to wrestle and fight, how to prepare for the raiding season that will come with spring. The concept of childhood education in this culture is entirely practical and experiential. There are no schools, no books, no formal curriculum. You learn by doing, by watching, by making mistakes and facing consequences. A child who does not learn to tend the fire properly might let it go out and endanger everyone. A child who does not learn to manage the animals might get kicked or gored. A child who does not learn to prepare food properly might poison the family. The stakes of learning are immediate and sometimes fatal, which makes for highly motivated students but also probably traumatizes a fair number of children who make normal childish errors with outsized consequences. The spiritual and religious life of the household continues through winter, perhaps intensifies because people have more time to contemplate existence and mortality when they are not busy with the work of survival. Prayers are offered to various gods: Thor for protection, Freya for fertility and future harvests, Odin for wisdom, Frigg for the safety of the family. Small shrines or sacred spaces might exist in the home, places where offerings are made, where rituals are performed. These might be as simple as a special shelf or corner where amulets and charms are kept, or as elaborate as a dedicated altar space if the family is wealthy enough to afford the luxury. Dreams are taken very seriously, considered messages from the gods or the spirits or the future. If someone has a particularly vivid or disturbing dream, it will be discussed by the family, interpreted, possibly acted upon. Dream interpretation is not a frivolous exercise. It is part of the survival strategy, a way of accessing information or warnings that might not be available through normal channels. An old woman who dreams of fire might lead the family to check the roof more carefully, discovering a weakness that would have led to disaster. A child who dreams of wolves might make the men check the livestock enclosures more thoroughly. Whether the dreams have any actual predictive power is less important than the fact that taking them seriously creates another layer of awareness and caution. The marking of time itself is interesting in a culture without clocks or calendars as we know them. Days blur together in the endless darkness. People track time by observing the slowly changing position of stars, by the phases of the moon when it is visible through the cloud cover, by internal rhythms and the gradual depletion of food stores that indicate how deep into winter they are. There are traditional festivals and holy days that break up the monotony, midwinter celebrations when special food is brought out and extra mead is drunk and the darkness is pushed back with firelight and forced cheer. These celebrations are crucial for morale, giving people something to look forward to, marking progress through the winter, reinforcing community bonds. Gifts are exchanged during these midwinter festivals, but they are practical gifts born of necessity rather than frivolous luxuries. A man might carve a new comb for his wife, demonstrating both his skill and his affection. A woman might weave a particularly fine scarf or hat for her husband, keeping him warm while showing her craftsmanship. Children receive toys if the family can spare the resources, carved wooden figures or simple dolls made from scraps of cloth and straw. These objects are treasured far beyond their material value, because they represent thought and effort and love in a season when everything is about mere survival. The anticipation of spring becomes almost painful as winter drags on. Every slight increase in daylight is noted and celebrated. The first signs of thaw, a drip of water from the roof, a slight softening of the snow, are greeted with joy that seems excessive until you understand what months of frozen darkness do to the human spirit. People start planning for spring activities with an intensity that borders on obsession. What needs to be repaired on the house, what fields need to be prepared for planting, what voyages need to be organised, what trades need to be made. This future-focused thinking helps people endure the present misery, giving them purpose and hope beyond simple survival. But spring is still months away, and you are still here in the Longhouse on a January night with no end in sight to the darkness. You're lying on your straw bed under your greasy furs, wedged between your snoring brother and your restless cousin, listening to the wind howl and the fire crackle and the animal shuffle. Your stomach is not quite full from dinner. It never is this deep into winter, but you are not starving either, so that is something. You smell like smoke and sweat and animals and months of accumulated human existence in close quarters, but so does everyone else, so nobody notices or cares. Your back aches from the lumpy bed and your skin itches from the lice and your mouth tastes like old fish. But you are warm enough, barely, and you are alive, and your family is alive, and that is the victory. Tomorrow will be almost identical to today, and the day after that, and the day after that, an endless succession of sameness broken only by small variations and minor crises. But you endure because endurance is all you have, because your ancestors endured and taught you how, because your children are watching and learning from your example, because giving up is not an option when your family's survival depends on every person continuing to function. This is not heroic endurance, not the kind that gets sung about in sagas. This is the grinding, everyday endurance of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances with nothing but stubbornness and community, and the absolute refusal to let winter win. The storytelling that happens in this environment takes on almost magical properties. When the scold begins to speak, the entire atmosphere in the Longhouse shifts. Children who were squirming and whining become still. Adults who were working on crafts set down their tools. Even the animals seem to settle into quieter behaviour, as if they too are listening. The scold's voice fills the space, sometimes loud and dramatic, sometimes dropping to a whisper that makes everyone lean in closer. The story unfolds, and for a while you are not a cold, uncomfortable, smelly Viking stuck in a dark house for months. You are sailing with legendary heroes, fighting alongside gods, experiencing adventures that make your own hardships seem small by comparison. The skill of a good storyteller cannot be overstated. They are not just reciting memorized text, they are performing, modulating their voice, using gestures, reading the audience and adjusting the pacing and emphasis to maximize impact. They know when to pause for effect, when to rush through exciting action sequences, when to draw out emotional moments. They make eye contact with listeners, including them in the experience, sometimes calling on audience members to participate by making sound effects or playing minor characters. This is interactive entertainment in its most ancient and pure form. Humans connecting through shared narrative in a way that no amount of technology has managed to improve upon. The content of these stories serves multiple functions beyond entertainment. Many sagas contain practical survival information disguised as narrative. How to navigate by stars, how to predict weather, how to judge character, how to negotiate conflicts. Heroes in the stories demonstrate virtues that the culture values: courage, yes, but also cleverness, loyalty, the ability to endure hardship without complaint, skill in crafts and fighting, generosity to friends and ruthlessness to enemies. Villains demonstrate traits to be avoided: cowardice, betrayal, excessive pride, poor judgment. Children absorbing these stories are receiving a cultural education, learning what their society expects from them and what behaviours will be praised or condemned. Religious content in the stories reinforces belief systems that help people cope with hardship. The gods themselves struggle and suffer and face seemingly insurmountable challenges, which makes human struggles feel less isolating. If Thor can be tricked by giants, if Odin must sacrifice an eye for wisdom, if the gods themselves know that Ragnarok will eventually destroy them, but they keep fighting anyway, then surely a cold winter is endurable. The cosmology of Norse belief provides explanations for suffering. The world is locked in an eternal struggle between order and chaos, between the gods and the forces of destruction, and humans are part of that struggle whether they like it or not. This is not comforting in a soft way, but it is meaningful. It places individual pain in a larger context. The musical traditions that accompany these stories are hauntingly beautiful in ways that modern recordings cannot fully capture. The instruments are simple, but in the acoustic environment of the Longhouse with its low ceilings and absorbing surfaces, the sound takes on qualities that are both intimate and otherworldly. A bone flute's high-piercing notes seem to cut through the darkness. A drum's deep rhythm synchronizes with heartbeats. The lyre's strings resonate in ways that make the air vibrate. Voices join in on choruses, not in the polished harmony of trained choirs, but in the rough, authentic unity of people sharing their breath and effort, creating something together that none of them could create alone. Some songs are work songs, designed to make repetitive labour more bearable by providing rhythm and distraction. The grinding of grain, which is backbreaking work that needs to be done regularly to provide flour for bread, becomes less tedious when accompanied by a song with a strong beat that matches the circular motion of the grinding stones. Weaving has songs, combing wool has songs, even the less pleasant tasks like cleaning out the animal stalls have songs, often humorous ones that mock the work even as they help people endure it. These songs are passed down through generations, ancient melodies whose origins are lost but whose utility keeps them alive. Sacred songs are different, more siripur, often in older forms of the language that many people do not fully understand but know are powerful. These are the songs used in rituals, in sacrifices, in moments of great importance or danger. They invoke the gods by their many names, recounting their deeds, asking for their favour or at least their notice. The melodies are often modal, built on scales that sound strange and ancient to modern ears, creating an atmosphere of mystery and connection to something older and bigger than individual human lives. When the whole household joins in one of these sacred songs, there is a sense of participating in something that has been happening for centuries, that will continue happening long after everyone present is dead, a kind of immortality through cultural continuity. Individual musicians might have particular songs or styles associated with them. The grandmother, who is known for her lullabies that can soothe even the most fretful child. The uncle, whose drinking songs always make everyone laugh and want another round. The visiting skald, whose compositions about specific families or events make people feel seen and valued, their lives deemed worthy of being turned into art. Musical reputation matters. Being known as talented or particularly moving can earn someone respect and hospitality, a place by the fire and a horn of mead and an attentive audience. Dancing woshobens, when it happens, is constrained by the limited space but still meaningful. People cannot exactly form elaborate patterns or do anything requiring much room, but they can sway in place, stomp rhythmically, move their arms and torsos, create a sense of physicality and energy that breaks up the static nature of winter confinement. Young people especially benefit from this, burning off the energy that would otherwise turn into restlessness and conflict. The dancing is not refined or choreographed. It is primal and communal, bodies moving together to shared rhythm. Everyone a little bit ridiculous, but nobody caring because everyone is being ridiculous together. The food culture during winter months deserves deeper exploration because eating is one of the few pleasures available when so much else is endurance and discomfort. The preparation of meals is a significant social event with multiple people involved in every stage. Fires must be carefully managed to provide the right level of heat. Ingredients must be retrieved from various storage locations around the Longhouse. Water must be fetched and heated. The cast iron pots and stone vessels that serve as cooking equipment must be cleaned, or at least cleaned enough, which is a relative term when you have limited water and no soap worth mentioning. The actual cooking is most often done by women, but men sometimes participate, especially if the meal involves meat that they hunted. There is a kind of pride in preparing food from an animal you killed, making sure nothing goes to waste, honouring the creature's sacrifice by turning it into something that nourishes your family. The process of butchering, preserving, and then cooking an animal is deeply understood by everyone in the household. Children watch and learn, gradually taking on more responsibility until they can handle every stage themselves. This intimate knowledge of where food comes from and what it takes to produce creates a respect for meals that modern grocery store culture has largely lost. Flavour in winter cooking is a challenge when fresh herbs and vegetables are gone. People rely heavily on salt for taste, probably consuming dangerous amounts by modern health standards, but not having much choice about it. Dried herbs from the summer, if they were gathered and stored properly, add some variety. Wild garlic and onions that were stored in the root cellar provide pungent flavouring. Honey, if the family has any, is precious and used sparingly but can transform a dish from merely edible to actually pleasant. Spices from trade are rare luxuries that only wealthy families might have. Peppercorns or coriander. Exotic tastes that seem almost magical after months of bland preserved food. The soups and stews that form the basis of most winter meals are not delicate or refined. They are thick, heavy, designed to fill stomachs and provide calories to bodies that are burning energy, just trying to stay warm. You might have barley or other grain providing bulk, dried peas or beans if you have them, chunks of whatever meat is available, all boiled together for hours until everything is soft and the flavours have merged into a kind of unified taste that is not particularly complex, but is satisfying in a primal way. You eat it with your hands, tearing off pieces of flatbread to scoop up the thick liquid, letting it fill your belly with warmth and substance. Bread itself is a major source of calories and effort. Grain must be ground into flour regularly, a task usually assigned to women or older children, using stone mills or querns that require significant strength and endurance to operate. The flour is then mixed with water, and sometimes fat or egg if available, kneaded into dough, and baked on hot stones near the fire, or sometimes in a primitive oven built into the wall of the Longhouse. The resulting bread is dense and heavy, nothing like the light fluffy bread modern people are used to, more like a very hard cracker or biscuit that you have to soak in soup or ale to soften enough to chew. But it is food, it is calories, and it keeps people alive. Preserved fish dominates many meals because coastal Vikings have access to abundant fish during warmer months, and the preservation techniques for fish are well developed. Drying and salting, fermenting. All these methods turn fresh fish into something that can last through winter. The taste is strong, intensely salty or smoky, or in the case of fermented fish, genuinely challenging to modern palates. Fermented fish, similar to modern surströmming but probably even more pungent, is something you acquire a taste for out of necessity. It smells like death, tastes like concentrated ocean mixed with ammonia, but it provides protein and fat and vitamins, and once you are hungry enough and have been eating it your whole life, you actually start to enjoy it in a Stockholm Syndrome kind of way. Dairy products, when available, are crucial nutrition sources. Milk from cows and goats, if the animals are still producing in winter, is drunk fresh or made into cheese or butter. The cheese-making process happens continuously because fresh milk will spoil quickly, even in cold temperatures. The resulting cheeses are hard and salty, designed to last, not to win taste competitions. Butter is made by churning cream in wooden barrels or animal skin bags, a process that requires sustained effort, shaking or pounding until the fat separates from the liquid. The butter is preserved with salt and stored in cool locations, providing crucial fat calories through the winter. Skyer, a fermented milk product similar to yogurt, is also made, providing probiotics that probably help with digestive health, even though the Vikings have no concept of bacteria or intestinal flora. Alcohol plays a significant role in winter survival, though calling it survival sounds dramatic for what amounts to drinking. Mead is the most celebrated, made from fermented honey, but it is expensive and typically reserved for special occasions unless you are wealthy. More common is ale, brewed from barley or other grains, weak by modern beer standards, but providing calories and making questionable water supplies safer to drink, since the brewing process kills pathogens. People drink ale throughout the day, adults and children both, because it is often safer than water and provides calories that pure water does not. Getting drunk is not really the goal for everyday drinking, though it certainly happens during festivals and celebrations, but rather maintaining a slight buzz that takes the edge off cold and boredom and helps people tolerate each other's company for months on end. The social aspects of eating are as important as the nutritional ones. Meals are communal affairs, everyone eating from shared bowls and platters, tearing food apart with their hands, using knives to cut pieces of meat, passing everything around so everyone gets some of everything. There is an enforced equality in this sharing. Everyone receives a portion, and while the portions might not be exactly equal, with men who do heavy labour getting more and small children getting less, there is a sense that everyone is participating in the same experience, eating the same food, facing the same challenges. This communal eating reinforces family bonds and social hierarchy simultaneously. You are part of the group, but you also know your place within it. Hunger is a constant low-level presence for most people by the deep winter months. You're never quite full, never quite satisfied, because food stores are finite and rationing is necessary to ensure they last until spring. Learning to function while hungry is a survival skill that everyone must develop. You learn to ignore the hollow feeling in your stomach, to not fixate on food even though you're thinking about it constantly, to do your work and complete your tasks despite your body's demands for more calories. Children especially struggle with this, their growing bodies demanding nutrition that is not available, and you watch them gradually become thinner and quieter as winter progresses, their actual energy dampened by insufficient food. There is a specific kind of meal that happens when food stores are starting to look genuinely concerning, what you might call a crisis meal. This is when the family gathers to assess what remains, to make hard decisions about further rationing, to discuss whether there is any possibility of obtaining more food before spring. These meetings have a somber quality. Even the children are quiet, understanding that this is serious. Calculations are made. How many weeks until we can expect the first signs of spring? How much food remains? How many people need to eat? What can we reduce and still keep everyone functional? Sometimes the decision is made to send some family members to stay with relatives who might have more food, breaking up the family temporarily to increase everyone's chances of survival. Occasionally, fishing through ice is possible if you are near a body of water that freezes thick enough to be safe but not so thick you cannot drill through. This is dangerous work. The ice can crack or shift. You can fall through into water so cold it stops your heart within minutes, but the potential reward of fresh fish makes it worth attempting. The fishers cut holes through the ice with augers or axes, then sit or kneel for hours in brutal cold, watching lines and hoping for a bite. When a fish is caught, it is a moment of celebration entirely disproportionate to the size of the fish, because it represents fresh protein, a break from preserved foods, proof that the world beyond the Longhouse still contains life and possibility. Hunting in winter is similarly dangerous but potentially rewarding. Deer and other game are also struggling to survive, which makes them less cautious and potentially easier to approach, but the conditions make tracking and killing them difficult. Snow reveals tracks, which is helpful, but it also reveals your own tracks to any predator that might be out there. Wolves are genuine threats, hungry and desperate like everyone else, and a lone hunter, or even a small group, can find themselves the hunted rather than the hunters. Still, men venture out when conditions allow, driven by the need to provide and the restlessness of confinement, and sometimes they return with meat that feels like a gift from the gods. The treatment of captured game is interesting from a cultural perspective. There is often a ritual element to the kill, thanking the animal for its sacrifice, perhaps making a small offering to the gods in appreciation for the successful hunt. The butchering is done with care and respect, making sure to use every part of the animal. Meat is divided according to social hierarchy and need, but even the lowest status family member receives some share. Bones are saved for making broth or tools. Hide and fur are carefully prepared for clothing or trade. Organs are either eaten immediately, often being considered delicacies, or preserved if possible. Nothing is wasted, because wasting food when everyone is hungry would be not just foolish but morally offensive. Scarcity creates interesting psychological dynamics around food. People become protective of their portions, eating slowly to make the experience last longer, carefully scraping bowls to get every last bit. There are probably hidden stashes, individuals secretly hoarding small amounts of food for themselves or their favourite children, behaviour that would be considered shameful if discovered, but is understood on some level as natural human selfishness in the face of deprivation. Conflicts arise over perceived unfairness in distribution, accusations that someone took more than their share or is sneaking food at night. These conflicts have to be managed carefully because they can escalate in the pressure cooker environment of the winter longhouse. Children's relationship with food is particularly complicated. They do not fully understand the scarcity, they just know they're hungry and want more. Adults have to balance being firm about rationing with not traumatizing children around food in ways that will create lifelong issues. This is a difficult balance, and probably many Viking children grew up with disordered eating patterns or anxiety around food scarcity. But it also taught resilience, the ability to function despite hunger, to value food properly, to understand that resources are finite and must be managed. These are lessons modern affluent children never learn, which makes them softer, but also perhaps psychologically healthier. The anticipation of specific foods becomes almost obsessive as winter drags on. People talk about what they will eat when spring comes, the first fresh greens, the first bird eggs, the first fish caught from open water rather than through ice. These future meals take on mythical qualities in conversation, described and imagined in detail that borders on the erotic. Planning summer meals becomes a form of entertainment and torture simultaneously, making your current hunger more acute, while also giving you something to dream about and work toward. The first spring meal, when it finally comes, is often surprisingly disappointing because nothing could live up to months of anticipation. But that disappointment lasts only a moment before the sheer relief of having more food overwhelms everything else. Feast days during winter, whether tied to religious observances or simply declared by the household head to boost morale, are carefully planned events. Food that has been hoarded specifically for these occasions is brought out. The best preserved meat, the last of the honey, special bread made with what little fine flour might be available, all served with extra portions and less concern about conservation. Alcohol flows more freely, stories are told with extra flourish, games and contests are organised. These feasts serve crucial psychological functions, breaking up monotony, giving people something to look forward to, creating positive memories that help balance out the grinding hardness of everyday winter existence. The cost in depleted food stores is considered worth it if it keeps the household's morale from collapsing. Gift-giving during these feast times, as mentioned before, tends toward the practical but can still be touching. A father carving a special spoon for his daughter, decorated with designs that represent her name or her personality. A mother weaving a particularly fine piece of cloth into a tunic for her son, using dyes if any are available to make it special. Siblings making small toys or trinkets for each other. These gifts are not about material value, they're about effort and thought and care, about taking scarce time and resources to create something specifically for someone you love. In a culture where survival is always the first priority, these gestures of affection beyond survival are deeply meaningful. The relationship between the inner world of the Longhouse and the outer world of winter is almost like two different realities. Inside, you have warmth, or at least not freezing temperatures. You have light from the fire, you have human company and animal presence. You have food, even if not enough of it. You have activity and conversation and the structures of social life. Outside is a void, darkness, cold that kills, emptiness, suppose broken only by wind, a landscape drained of colour and life and possibility. The threshold of the door is a boundary between existence and annihilation. and crossing it even for necessary tasks requires mental preparation and physical fortification. When someone does have to go outside, it is an expedition requiring specific preparations, extra layers of clothing, furs wrapped and tied securely, hands covered in mittens made from animal hide with the fur inside, feet wrapped in layers of cloth before being shoved into boots made from reindeer hide or sealskin. Face protection is improvised from scarves or masks, anything to keep the wind from stripping heat directly from exposed skin. You do not go out alone if you can help it, because if you fall or get disoriented in blowing snow or simply collapse from cold, having someone else there might save your life. You do not stay out longer than absolutely necessary. Complete your task and get back inside. Speed matters more than thoroughness. The psychological shift that happens when you step outside into that hostile environment is significant. You go from being a person with thoughts and feelings and social connections to being a body fighting for survival, or your entire consciousness narrowing to immediate physical sensation and the task at hand. Get to the woodpile, load your arms, get back to the door. Check the animals in the barn, make sure they have food and water. Get back inside. Relieve yourself quickly in the designated snow pile. Get back to warmth. There is no room for contemplation or distraction. The cold focuses your mind with brutal efficiency. Some people find this simplicity almost appealing, a break from the complex social dynamics inside, but most just find it terrifying. The moment of re-entry into the Longhouse after being outside brings a rush of sensation that's both pleasant and painful. The relative warmth hits your frozen skin and starts the burning, untingling process of returning circulation. Your nose runs immediately as frozen mucus melts. Your eyes water. Your fingers and toes hurt with that specific ache of thawing extremities. People crowd around to help you remove layers of frozen clothing, checking for signs of frostbite, offering hot drinks or food to help rewarm your core. There is often a moment of genuine gratitude for the smelly, cramped, uncomfortable Longhouse, because at least it is not outside. At least you are alive and whole. At least you made it back. The psychological impact of months of this lifestyle is profound. Modern people who experience sensory deprivation or extreme isolation in controlled settings for days or weeks report significant psychological effects, disorientation, hallucinations, depression. Vikings are experiencing something similar but stretched over months, and done as a communal rather than individual experience, which probably helps somewhat but cannot entirely prevent the mental strain. You start to feel like winter is the natural state of the world, that warmth and light and space and fresh food are things you imagined or dreamed. The world shrinks to the dimensions of the Longhouse and the faces of your family. Everything outside this bubble becomes increasingly abstract and unreal. Cabin fever, though they would not call it that, is a real and serious problem. People become irritable and short-tempered for no apparent reason. Small annoyances that would be easily overlooked in normal circumstances become infuriating. Someone's habitual cough, or the way they eat, or the stories they tell become unbearable. Fights break out over nothing. Shouting matches that are really about the general misery of existence but get focused on some trivial trigger. Physical altercations are possible, especially among young men with nowhere to direct their energy and aggression. The elders and authority figures have to constantly manage these conflicts, smoothing ruffled feathers, enforcing peace, reminding everyone that they need to stay united to survive. There are likely individuals who handle this confinement worse than others. People whose personalities or mental health needs are poorly suited to months of forced proximity and limited stimulation. Someone who needs solitude to function, someone with what we might now recognize as clinical depression or anxiety, someone with anger, management issues. These people do not have the option of removing themselves from the situation or seeking help. They have to just cope, or fail to cope, and the family has to deal with the consequences. This probably leads to a lot of people being medicated with alcohol, or simply avoiding certain family members as much as possible in the limited space, or in extreme cases, restraining or isolating people who become dangerous to themselves or others. The concept of privacy in this environment is so foreign to modern sensibilities that it's worth dwelling on. You're never alone, ever. There is no room you can retreat to, no door you can close, no moment when other people are not seeing and hearing you. Every bodily function is communal knowledge. Every emotion is visible to everyone. Every conversation is overheard. Every moment of your existence is witnessed. For people who value solitude and privacy, this would be a special kind of hell. For people who are more naturally communal, it might be easier but still exhausting. The complete loss of any interior private life, any space that is just yours, has to have psychological consequences. Some people probably cope by creating mental privacy when physical privacy is impossible. You learn to tune out the people around you, to not listen to conversations even though you can hear them, to not watch people even though they are in your line of sight, to respect a kind of imaginary boundary even when no physical boundary exists. This is a learned skill, a social courtesy that makes communal living possible, and teaching children when to pay attention and when to politely ignore what is happening around them is part of their education. Breaking these unwritten rules by, for example, staring at someone when they're trying to have a private moment or clearly listening to a conversation you're not part of would be considered rude and create social problems. The sound environment inside the Longhouse is never silent, but there are different qualities of sound depending on what time it is and what people are doing. During the day, there is the general hum of activity, people talking, tools being used, animals making noise, the fire crackling, babies crying or laughing, children playing or arguing. This ambient noise creates a kind of background that you learn not to consciously notice, though if it suddenly stops, it is jarring. At night, the sounds shift to snoring, sleep, talking, breathing, the settling of the fire, occasional animal movement, the wind outside, a different but equally present soundscape that prevents true silence. Some people are kept awake by these sounds, lying there cataloguing every noise and who is making it, while others somehow learn to sleep through anything out of sheer exhaustion. The smell environment is similarly constant and inescapable. You might think people become nose blind to the smell, and to some extent they do, but there are also variations and spikes that penetrate even adapted nostrils. When someone passes gas, which happens constantly given the diet of beans and fermented foods and cabbage, it adds a new layer to the existing aroma palette. When the waste bucket gets particularly full, its contribution becomes impossible to ignore. When someone with an infected wound or a festering tooth exhales in your direction, you get a blast of decay that makes your eyes water. When the stew is cooking and smells appealing, it briefly overcomes the other smells. When someone vomits from illness or bad food, everyone is acutely aware of it for hours despite attempts to clean it up. Your olfactory world is rich and varied and almost universally unpleasant. Touch as a primary sense becomes heightened when you are living in such close quarters. You know the texture of every fur and fabric in the house, which ones are softer or rougher, which ones provide better warmth. You know the feel of the wooden walls and floors, smoothed by decades of contact with hands and feet. You know the warmth pattern of the fire, where you can be close enough to benefit without getting burned. You know the body heat signatures of your family members, who runs hot and makes a good sleeping companion, who runs cold and needs extra furs. You become expert at moving through the space without looking, navigating by touch and memory when the fire burns low and everything is shadows. The taste environment is obviously dominated by food, but there are other tastes too. The air itself has a taste, smoke and moisture and something organic from all the breathing and living happening in the space. Water from different sources tastes different. Snowmelt versus well water versus stream water, and people have preferences and opinions about which is best. The wooden and horn cups that hold drinks impart their own flavours. The metallic taste of blood is familiar when someone has a cut or loses a tooth. The bitter taste of certain medicinal herbs when someone is trying to treat an illness. Your tongue is constantly registering information about your environment, another sense that modern people have largely lost the habit of using. The hierarchy within the household becomes more visible and important during winter confinement. Every group needs structure to function, and when that group is trapped together for months, clear hierarchies prevent constant power struggles. The oldest male, usually the grandfather or father, typically holds ultimate authority, making major decisions about resource allocation and household policy. His word is final. Challenging him openly would be a serious breach of protocol. Below him are adult males ranked by age and accomplishment, then adult females led by the oldest woman or the wife of the head of household. Children are at the bottom of the hierarchy, but even among them there are rankings based on age and gender, older children having authority over younger ones. Boys often having privileges, girls do not, though girls also have responsibilities boys do not. This hierarchy manifests in countless small ways throughout daily life. Who eats first? Who gets the best pieces of meat? Who sits closest to the fire? Who speaks at what times? Who makes decisions about various tasks and activities? All these are determined by your place in the social structure. Fighting against your assigned position is possible but difficult and socially costly. You would need to prove yourself exceptional in some way to rise above your expected station. Most people accept their place, and even those who resent it understand that challenging the hierarchy threatens the stability everyone depends on for survival. Better to be unhappy but alive than to create chaos that could kill everyone. Women's power within this hierarchy is interesting because it is both significant and constrained. A woman, especially the lead woman of the household, has enormous practical authority over daily operations. She manages food, clothing, healthcare, child rearing, craft production, arguably more crucial to day-to-day survival than what the men do. But her authority is exercised within parameters set by male family heads, and she cannot override decisions made by senior males even when she might know better. This creates tensions that have to be navigated carefully. Women finding ways to influence decisions without seeming to challenge male authority, or occasionally just ignoring directives they think are stupid, and hoping the positive results will justify their insubordination. Children within this system are learning not just practical skills but social skills, how to read status cues, when to speak and when to stay silent, how to show respect to superiors and how to exercise authority over juniors. A 10-year-old boy learning that he can order his 8-year-old sister around is learning about power and gender relations. That same 8-year-old girl learning that she must obey her younger brother but has authority over toddlers is learning her place in the social order. These lessons are not explicitly taught, so much as absorbed through daily experience. Watching adults, experiencing consequences when you step out of line, gradually internalizing the rules that govern social interaction. Conflict resolution within the household is crucial because unresolved conflicts in such close quarters can poison the entire environment. Some conflicts are resolved through clear hierarchy. The authority figure simply makes a ruling and everyone has to accept it. Others are resolved through negotiation and compromise, mediated by elders who have experience navigating interpersonal dynamics. Some conflicts are resolved through social pressure, the community making it clear that someone's behaviour is unacceptable until they modify it. And some conflicts are never really resolved, just suppressed and managed. People learning to live with grudges and resentments because the alternative is worse. Violence within the household is possible but has to be carefully controlled. A fight between two young men might be allowed to proceed if it seems like it will blow off steam and resolve an issue, with others watching to make sure it does not go too far. Violence by men against women or by adults against children is probably more common than modern people would like to think, but also has limits because injuring family members reduces the household's overall capacity to survive. Violence against the elderly would be particularly shocking and unacceptable because they hold cultural knowledge and social authority. Violence against infants and young children, while probably occurring in some households, would be recognised as crossing a line into genuine monstrousness. The community would remember and judge. The sick and injured represent a special category of concern during winter. When someone becomes seriously ill or suffers a major injury, the entire household's survival can be threatened. That person cannot contribute labour. They consume resources, including precious food that could go to healthy workers. They require care that takes time and energy from others, and they might die and create a psychological burden for everyone. There is tension between the genuine care and affection families feel for sick members and the cold practical calculations of survival. Most families lean heavily toward care and compassion, doing everything possible to heal the sick person, but the undercurrent of worry about resources is always present. Medical knowledge is a mixture of practical experience, herbal remedies that sometimes work, magical thinking, and prayer. Some treatments are actually effective. Honey on wounds really does have antibacterial properties. Willow bark tea really does reduce pain and fever because it contains salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin. Other treatments are useless or actively harmful but persist because people do not understand causation and correlation. If someone recovered after you prayed to air and gave an offering, then obviously the prayer and offering worked, not considering that the person might have recovered anyway or that your other interventions might have been the actual helpful factor. Serious injuries like broken bones are terrifying because they can easily become fatal if infection sets in, or if the break does not heal properly. Setting a broken bone is done without anaesthesia, beyond perhaps giving the patient mead or something to bite down on, and the pain is excruciating. Splinting and immobilising the limb is done with wood and cloth, and then you wait and hope. If the bone sets badly, the person might be permanently disabled, unable to do certain types of work, which affects their status and prospects. If infection develops, you might have to amputate, which is often a death sentence given the lack of sterile technique and antibiotics, but sometimes people survive and adapt to life with a missing limb. Infections are poorly understood but greatly feared. When a wound starts to smell bad and show red streaks and cause fever, people know this is serious even if they do not understand the bacterial processes involved. Treatments include cleaning wounds with strong alcohol or vinegar, applying various poultices made from herbs and animal products, prayer and offerings to healing gods, and ultimately either the person's immune system wins or they die. Some people survive infections that should have killed them. Their bodies somehow fighting off the bacteria, and they are seen as having special favour from the gods or unusual strength. Others die from infections that seem minor, and this is seen as bad luck or divine disfavour, or simply the mysterious workings of fate. Dental problems, as mentioned earlier, are common, and there is very little that can be done beyond extraction once a tooth becomes infected. The process of pulling a tooth without modern tools or pain relief is brutal. Someone holds the patient down, someone else uses pliers or similar tools to grip the tooth, and then it is a matter of pulling and twisting until the tooth comes free, hopefully with the whole root intact. The pain is tremendous. The risk of infection afterward is high, and the gap left behind makes eating more difficult for the rest of the person's life. Tooth decay is common due to diet and lack of dental care. So many adults are missing multiple teeth, which affects their ability to eat certain foods and probably contributes to nutritional deficiencies. Eye problems are also common and not well treatable. Smoke exposure irritates eyes constantly, leading to chronic redness and tearing. Snow blindness affects people who spend too much time outside in bright snow conditions without eye protection. Infections of the eye from bacteria or other pathogens can lead to partial or total vision loss. Cataracts develop in older people, gradually dimming their vision until they are effectively blind, and there is no surgery to fix this. You just adapt to increasing disability. Blindness in this society is a serious handicap, but not a death sentence. Blind people can still contribute to household work in various ways, but they become dependent on others for guidance and protection. Mental illness is recognised in some forms but not in others, and is often attributed to supernatural causes. Someone who has severe mood swings might be seen as possessed by spirits or cursed. Someone who hears voices might be considered mad or possibly divinely gifted, depending on what the voices say and how the person responds to them. Depression would be hard to distinguish from normal winter sadness, but severe depression that prevents someone from functioning would be noticeable and concerning. Treatment would include herbal remedies that sometimes have psychoactive properties, ritual cleansing or exorcisms, keeping the person safe from self-harm, and hoping they recover. Some do, some do not. And families have to cope with members who cannot fully participate in communal life. Pregnancy and childbirth during winter months are particularly dangerous. Pregnant women need extra nutrition which is in short supply. They need to avoid certain strenuous activities, but everyone needs to work, so this is difficult, and they need to stay warm, which is never quite achieved. Childbirth itself, happening in the smoky, dim environment of the Longhouse with midwives who have experience but no medical training or sterile technique, is risky for both mother and baby. Many women die in childbirth. Many babies are stillborn or die shortly after birth, and this is accepted as tragic but common. Women who successfully bear multiple healthy children are valued and respected, their fertility and luck seen as blessings. Newborns in winter are particularly vulnerable. They need to be kept warm, which means being held close to bodies almost constantly, passed between mother and grandmother, and other female relatives who keep the baby against their skin under layers of clothing. They need to be fed frequently, so nursing mothers need extra food even when food is short. They cry, as babies do, and in the close confines of the Longhouse, a crying baby is everyone's problem. Most families are patient and understanding. Everyone has been a baby. Everyone values children as the future of the family, but a baby who cries excessively, or at night when people are trying to sleep, can strain that patience. Colicky babies are a special kind of hell for everyone involved. Young children, toddlers and early school age are both delightful and exhausting in the winter Longhouse. They have energy to burn, but nowhere to burn it safely. The space is too small and full of hazards for running around. They need entertainment and stimulation, or they become whiny and difficult. But providing that entertainment falls to adults who are already exhausted from other demands. They make messes, spilling food, tracking in snow if they have been outside, generally creating more work for people who already have too much work. But they also provide joy and hope, their laughter and play reminding everyone why survival matters, their development and growth giving purpose to the hardship. Games and stories specifically for children help pass the time and teach cultural values. Simple games with stones or sticks, counting games, rhyming games, all help develop cognitive skills while keeping children occupied. Stories about brave children who faced challenges and succeeded. Cautionary tales about children who disobeyed and suffered consequences. Funny stories about trickster children. All these help children understand their world and their place in it. Physical play like wrestling or chasing is encouraged when space and conditions allow, because children need physical activity for healthy development, even if that activity is sometimes annoying to adults trying to work or rest. The relationship between children and the animals in the house is interesting. Children often form attachments to particular animals, naming them, talking to them, spending time with them. This can be both sweet and problematic. Sweet because it shows empathy and connection to other living creatures. problematic because some of those animals will eventually be slaughtered and eaten, and children need to understand that reality without being traumatized. Learning to hold contradictory feelings, affection for an animal, and acceptance of its role as food is part of growing up in this culture. Some children handle this better than others, but all must eventually accept it. Adolescents face unique challenges in the winter confinement. Their bodies are changing, hormones are surging, they are becoming aware of themselves as sexual beings but have no privacy to explore that. They are trying to establish identities separate from their parents, but have no physical or social space to do that. It must be intensely frustrating, and probably contributes to the tension and conflict that often characterises adolescence. Young men may become physically aggressive, testing boundaries, challenging authority figures, getting into fights. Young women may become sullen or rebellious, pushing against the limitations of their gender role even while being trained into it. Romantic and sexual feelings between adolescents in the household create additional complexity. Depending on the family structure, there might be cousins of similar age who are attracted to each other, which may or may not be considered acceptable depending on how closely related they are and what the cultural norms are. Young people from different households might have established relationships before winter and now be separated for months, which creates longing and worry about whether the relationship will survive. Managing adolescent sexuality in close quarters without making it weird or traumatic requires careful navigation by adults, providing some level of understanding and outlet while maintaining social norms and preventing problems. The role of the elderly in mentoring and teaching the young is crucial during these winter months when there is time for more intensive instruction than might be possible during busy seasons. A grandmother teaching her granddaughter the fine details of weaving, not just the mechanics but the aesthetic judgments, how to choose colours, how to create patterns, how to take pride in your work. A grandfather teaching his grandson about navigation and exploration, using stories and diagrams drawn in the dirt floor or snow to explain how to read stars and currents and weather signs. These intergenerational relationships preserve knowledge and skills while also creating emotional bonds that strengthen the family unit. Stories about ancestors serve multiple functions. They entertain, they educate, they reinforce family identity and pride. Hearing about your great-grandfather who survived a shipwreck and walked 100 miles home through snow, or your great-grandmother who defended the farm against raiders when all the men were gone, gives you models of courage and resilience to aspire to. It also creates a sense of continuity. You are part of a chain of survival that stretches back generations and will hopefully continue forward through you and your descendants. This is not small comfort when you are cold and hungry and wondering if you will make it to spring. You're doing what your ancestors did, and they survived, and so might you. The concept of fate in Norse culture, that your lifespan and major events are determined by powers beyond your control but you still have responsibility for how you face them, helps people cope with hardship and loss. If a child dies, it is devastating, but also the child's fate was already woven by the Norns, the gods who control destiny. This does not mean you do not grieve or feel pain, but it might mean you do not torture yourself with what-if scenarios or self-blame. You did what you could. The outcome was determined by fate. You must accept and continue. This worldview can seem fatalistic or passive, but it can also be liberating, freeing you from the paralysis of guilt and allowing you to focus on what you can control. The physical changes that happen to people over the course of winter are noticeable. You lose weight, not in a healthy way, but in a gaunt, malnourished way, your face becoming more angular, your clothes hanging looser. Your skin gets pale from lack of sunlight, taking on a translucent quality that makes you look almost ghostly. Your hair and nails continue to grow and need trimming, but they become more brittle from nutritional deficiencies. Your teeth may loosen, especially if you're developing scurvy from lack of vitamin C, though no one knows what scurvy is or how to prevent it beyond eating certain foods that empirically seem to help. Your immune system weakens from stress and poor nutrition, making you more susceptible to illness. Children show these effects more dramatically because they are still growing and need more nutrition relative to their size. A child entering winter chubby and healthy might emerge thin and listless, having burned through reserves and not gotten enough calories to support growth. Some children never quite recover fully. Developmental delays or stunting that affects them for life. Others bounce back quickly once food becomes available again, their young bodies resilient and eager to make up lost ground. But every winter takes a toll, a biological price paid for survival in an environment hostile to human life. The psychological preparation for the end of winter is its own phenomenon. As the days begin, imperceptibly at first, to lengthen, as the sun's track through the sky begins to climb even slightly higher. As temperatures start to show tiny hints of moderation, people begin to dare to hope this is dangerous, more psychologically speaking, because false spring can break your heart. A few warmer days followed by a return to brutal cold can plunge people back into despair deeper than before. But the hope is also necessary. Without it, people would not have the motivation to keep going through the last hardest weeks when food is at its lowest and everyone is exhausted from months of endurance. Planning for spring becomes a major topic of conversation. Fields need to be assessed and prepared for planting as soon as ground thaws. Boats need to be checked for damage from winter storage and repaired if necessary. Tools need to be sharpened and repaired. Relationships with neighbours and trading partners need to be re-established after months of isolation. Young men plan raiding expeditions, whether they will go, what they hope to gain, who will be on the crew. Families discuss marriages, whether proposed matches from before winter are still agreeable, whether new arrangements should be made. All of this forward-looking discussion helps people psychologically survive the present by focusing on the future. The first signs of actual thaw are greeted with celebrations that might seem excessive to outsiders, but are perfectly calibrated to the emotions of people who have been trapped in frozen darkness for months. The first drip of water from the roof, the first patch of bare ground visible through melting snow, the first birdsong heard after months of silence except for crows and ravens. These moments are marked and remembered. People will talk about them for days, comparing their observations, confirming that yes, it is really happening. Winter is finally loosening its grip. The first trips outside that are not purely necessity-driven happen cautiously. Someone ventures out just to stand in slightly less cold air and look at the sky, stretching their vision beyond the confines of the Longhouse walls. Children, if they can be spared from work, are allowed to play in snow that is starting to soften, making snowballs that pack better than the dry powder of deep winter, falling down and laughing without the life-threatening consequences that falling in extreme cold would have. Adults take walks around the property, assessing damage from winter, checking buildings and fences and stored equipment, their breath not quite freezing anymore, their fingers not quite going numb immediately. The reclamation of space is gradual but transformative. As temperatures rise even slightly, the Longhouse becomes less suffocating. You can open the door for longer periods without letting all the heat escape. You can air out some of the terrible smells, letting wind blow through and carry away months of accumulated staleness. You can move some activities outside or to outbuildings that were too cold to use during deepest winter. You can spread out, physically and psychologically, no longer forced in such intimate proximity. This expansion of livable space is a huge relief, even before you get to actual warm weather. The first fresh food of spring is a religious experience. The first wild greens, even if they are bitter or tough, taste like life itself after months of preserved food. The first eggs from chickens who have started laying again bring tears of joy to people who have been eating dried fish and stale bread. The first milk from cows who have calved or goats who have kidded is precious beyond description, used carefully in cooking, or given to children who need it most. These foods are not just nutrition, they are symbols of survival, proof that you made it, that the world is renewing itself, that your gamble on endurance paid off. Reuniting with the wider community after winter isolation is both joyful and awkward. You have been living in such close intimacy with your immediate family that the social skills required for interacting with outsiders feel rusty. You've developed private jokes and references that mean nothing to anyone else. You have probably grown to intensely dislike certain family members and feel guilty about it. You have secrets, things that happen during winter that the family has decided to keep private, conflicts or illnesses or deaths that no one outsider needs to know about. Navigating the social world beyond your household takes readjustment. Remembering how to be a public person rather than just a family member. The dead who have been stored through winter can finally be properly buried. This is both a relief and a reopening of grief that may have been partially frozen along with the bodies. Graves are dug in earth that has finally thawed enough to be workable. Funeral rites are performed, giving the deceased the proper send-off they could not have during winter. These funerals are community events. Other families come to pay respects, to support the grieving family, to acknowledge losses that everyone knows could have been their own. There is a kind of collective grief for everyone who did not make it through winter, whether from your family or others, because every death diminishes the community. The survivors of winter look at each other with a mixture of relief and new understanding. You've been tested together. You have seen each other at your worst and somehow still function as a family. You know things about each other that cannot be unknown, weaknesses and strengths revealed under pressure. Some relationships are stronger for having endured this test together. Others are permanently damaged. Resentments that built up over months of forced proximity not easily forgiven or forgotten. But you all survived. That is what matters most. You're alive to face another year, another cycle of seasons, another eventual winter. The lessons learned from each winter are passed down. What strategies worked, what mistakes were made, what innovations might make next winter more bearable. The grandmother who figured out a better way to preserve fish shares her knowledge with daughters and granddaughters. The man who nearly died from frostbite teaches younger men about the warning signs and prevention. The child who grew up through a particularly hard winter internalizes lessons about resource management and endurance that will serve them their entire life. Each winter adds to the accumulated wisdom of survival that defines the culture. Looking back at the winter from the perspective of summer, it seems almost impossible that you lived through it. The hardships that were daily reality fade somewhat in memory, not forgotten, but no longer immediate and overwhelming. What remains strongest are the moments of connection, the laughter shared over a good story, the comfort of sleeping close to family, the pride in surviving something genuinely difficult, the appreciation for simple pleasures that you only truly understand after months of deprivation. You are not the same person who entered winter. No one is. The experience has marked you, shaped you, taught you things about yourself and about life that could not be learned any other way. The cycle will repeat, of course. Winter comes every year with the regularity of the tide, and you know that in 8 or 9 months you'll be back in that same longhouse facing the same challenges. This knowledge could be crushing, but it is also stabilizing. You know what to expect. You know you can survive because you have survived. You know what preparations to make and what strategies to employ. Experience becomes your ally. Each winter survived, making you better equipped for the next one. Accumulating knowledge and skills and psychological resilience that turn you from a victim of winter into someone who can face it and prevail. The children who grow up with this cycle internalize a particular worldview. Life is hard. Resources are limited. Survival requires community and effort and sacrifice. Comfort is temporary, but hardship can be endured. The world is beautiful and terrible simultaneously. These lessons serve them well for the realities they will face, but they also limit imagination about alternative ways of living. The idea that winter could be comfortable, that food could be abundant year-round, that individuals could have privacy and personal space. These concepts would seem like impossible fantasies. Things gods might enjoy, but not real people living real lives. The occasional trader or traveller who makes it through winter conditions to reach your settlement brings news from the outside world. Other families and communities, births and deaths, feuds and alliances. The kind of information that helps you locate your family in the larger social landscape. These visitors are welcomed with hospitality that might seem excessive given how limited resources are. But hospitality is a sacred duty and also a practical necessity. You feed and house the traveller well because someday you or your family might be the traveller depending on someone else's generosity. And because the traveller brings valuable information and maintains social connections that might prove crucial. The stories the traveller tells about their journey through winter conditions become instant entertainment and education. How they navigated by stars when trails were obliterated by snow. How they built emergency shelters from snow and survived storms that would have killed less experienced travellers. Who they encountered. What conditions were like in other settlements. Which routes are passable and which are too dangerous. These stories expand the mental map of the world beyond your immediate surroundings, reminding you that life continues elsewhere. That other families are facing similar challenges, that you are part of a larger human community, all struggling against the same hostile environment. The gradual return of colour to the world as spring progresses is almost overwhelming after months of monochrome. The first green shoots pushing through dead vegetation, the first flowers, hardy early bloomers that can tolerate cold, their colours shocking against brown earth and white snow. The sky shifting from constant grey to occasionally blue, actual, bright blue, that hurts to look at after so long without it. These visual changes affect mood in profound ways. People smile more, move with more energy, speak with more animation. Colour and light are not luxuries. They are psychological necessities that you only fully appreciate after being deprived of them. The soundscape changes too, from the silence and wind of winter to the bird song of returning migrants, the running water of melting snow creating streams and rivulets, the sounds of human activity expanding as people can work outside again. Laughter and conversation happen more freely when you're not all crammed into a single room sharing stale air. These sounds of construction and repair as buildings are fixed and new structures are started. The sounds of animals being let out to pasture after months of confinement. Their evident joy at having space to move expressed in running and jumping and vocalizations. All these sounds weave together into a symphony of renewal that is the opposite of winter's harsh minimalism. The expansion of diet as fresh foods become available is not just nutritional but deeply psychological. Your body craves variety and fresh nutrients after months of sameness, and the first salads of wild greens, the first fresh fish caught from ice-free water, the first eggs. These foods satisfy cravings you have been suppressing all winter. Meals become celebrations again rather than merely fuel for survival. People linger over food, enjoying flavours and textures, eating slowly rather than just shoveling in calories. The social aspects of eating become pleasant rather than tense. No one is worried about portions or hoarding, or whether there will be enough. As we come to the end of our journey through a Viking winter, it is worth reflecting on what this experience teaches us about human resilience and adaptability. Modern people often think of themselves as soft, unable to handle real hardship. And there is probably truth to that when comparing modern life to historical survival challenges. But the capacity for endurance is not gone from humanity. It is just dormant in most of us. waiting for circumstances that require it. The Vikings who survived these winters were not superhuman. They were ordinary people pushed to extraordinary effort by circumstances, and that capacity exists in their descendants too, in all of us, even if we never have to use it. The communal nature of survival in these conditions reminds us that humans are fundamentally social creatures. We survive as groups, not as individuals. Our ability to cooperate and support each other and divide labour and share resources is what allows us to thrive in environments that would kill isolated individuals. The Longhouse in winter is an extreme example of this, but the principle applies broadly. We are stronger together than apart, and building strong communities and families is not just nice. It is essential for facing whatever challenges the world presents. The acceptance of hardship as a normal part of life, rather than an aberration to be immediately fixed, is a mental habit that served Vikings well and might serve us too. Not every problem can be solved immediately. Not every discomfort can or should be eliminated. Sometimes the healthy response is to acknowledge difficulty, prepare as well as possible, and then endure with grace and humour. This is not about romanticising suffering or suggesting that modern comforts are bad, but about recognising that some things in life are hard, and that is okay. You can handle it. Humans have handled much worse. The value of stories and culture in providing meaning and structure during difficult times cannot be overstated. When physical circumstances are grim, having mental and emotional resources to draw on makes the difference between mere survival and survival with dignity and purpose. The sagas and songs and traditions of Viking culture gave people ways to understand their suffering, to connect with their past and future, to feel part of something larger than their individual misery. Modern people need this too. Stories and art and culture that help us make sense of our experiences and locate ourselves in meaningful narratives. The practical skills and knowledge that allowed Vikings to survive, from food preservation to navigation to medicine to construction, remind us of the value of competence and self-reliance. Modern life has made us dependent on systems and specialists for almost everything, which creates efficiency but also vulnerability. Knowing how to do things yourself, understanding the basics of how the world works, having hands-on skills beyond the purely intellectual, these things matter both practically and psychologically. The Vikings who could build a shelter, start a fire, preserve food, treat injuries, were not just more likely to survive, they also had more confidence and agency in the face of challenges. The rhythm of seasons and the acceptance of cyclical rather than linear time is another lesson worth considering. Modern culture tends to expect constant progress and improvement, but Viking experience recognised that life has seasons. Sometimes you grow and flourish, sometimes you hunker down and survive, and both phases are necessary and valuable. Accepting that you cannot always be productive or growing or improving, that sometimes maintenance and endurance are the appropriate goals, might reduce the anxiety many modern people feel about not doing enough or being enough. As you lie here now in your comfortable bed, in your climate-controlled room, with access to abundant food and modern medicine and privacy and light at the flip of a switch, take a moment to appreciate these luxuries that would have seemed like divine blessings to your ancestors, but also recognise the thread that connects you to those hardy people who endured months of frozen darkness in smoky, cramped longhouses, smelling of unwashed humanity and livestock, eating dried fish and stale bread, and somehow finding moments of joy and meaning in the midst of hardship. That strength is in you too, dormant perhaps, but real. The story of Vikings surviving winter is ultimately a story about what humans can endure when they must, about the power of community and culture, about finding meaning in difficulty, about the daily unglamorous courage of simply continuing when everything is hard. It is not a romantic story. The reality was often grim and smelly and uncomfortable and sad. But it is a human story, and one that reminds us of our species' incredible capacity to adapt and persist, and even occasionally thrive in circumstances that seem impossible. And now, as this long journey through a Viking winter comes to an end, as your mind has wandered through the cold darkness and smoke and closeness of that longhouse, as you have imagined the sounds and smells and sensations of a life so different from your own, perhaps you find yourself grateful for your warm bed and your solitude and your ability to reach for a snack whenever you want one. Or perhaps you find yourself wondering whether something has been lost in all our modern comfort, whether the intensity of shared survival created bonds and meanings that our isolated abundance cannot replicate. Both responses are valid, both contain truth. Sleep well now, in your comfortable present, knowing that you carry within you the strength of all those ancestors who survived impossible winters, who endured what had to be endured, who found light in darkness and a warmth in community, who made it through to spring and taught their children how to do the same. That legacy is yours, whether you ever need to use it or not, a reserve of resilience waiting in your genes and your culture, proof that humans can handle far more than we think we can, that we survive not just as individuals but as families and communities and cultures, that we are, in the end, incredibly tough creatures who have earned our place in this sometimes hostile but always beautiful world. Good night.